Chapter 4. Neither of the midshipmen was present at the interview between the captain and the rajah. The second lieutenant, the captain of the marines, and the doctor alone accompanied him, with an escort of 20 bluejackets and as many marines. A large crowd of people had collected to see them pass along to the palace, which was a bare, barn-like structure, but they looked on sullenly and silently as the party passed through them on their way. They were kept waiting some little time outside the building, then entered through a doorway which led them into a large unfurnished room, at the end of which the rajah was seated. He rose when the officers entered, and received them with an appearance of great cordiality, his chiefs standing behind him. The conversation was wholly of a complimentary character. The subject of the business on which the British ship had come was not even touched upon. Refreshments, consisting of native sweets and palm wine, were then passed around, and the captain, seeing that all business talk was to be deferred, took his leave. The doctor, who was fond of the two midshipmen, was always ready to chat freely with them. "What do you think of our ally, Dr. Horsley?" Dick asked him, when, having changed his full uniform for a suit of undress, he came up on deck. "Well, between you and me, Balderson, I have seldom seen a more unmitigated looking ruffian in my life. Even for a Malay he is ugly. Soh Hay tells me that in his young days he was a great fighter, and his face and shoulders are seamed with scars. I asked how he came to be rajah, for he does not look at all the type of the better class of people. Soh told me that, in the first place, he took to the jungle, owing to his having kissed in a quarrel the son of the chief here. He was joined by other fugitives, set up as a pirate, and captured by surprise one of the chief's prahus. His force grew rapidly, and he made a night attack on the chief's campong, killed him and all the members of his family, and caused himself to be elected chief of the tribe, which was then a small one. Gradually he swallowed up one after another of his weaker neighbours, sometimes by force, sometimes by treachery. I believe he is now confronted by more powerful chiefs, and that it is only because he is possessed of some 6 or 8 piratical prahus that he has been able to maintain his position. No doubt he has become alarmed by a prospect of a combination against him, and has so invited us to support him. Such a step will, of course, greatly add to his unpopularity, but doubtless he thinks that, with our help, he could defy his enemies." "But he cannot suppose, Doctor," Harry said indignantly, "that we are going to fight for such a rascal as he is against the men he has been plundering." "Well, I don't expect he does think that we are going to fight for him, unless he can show us that it is to our interest to do so. I should imagine that he hopes that the effect of our appearance here will be to either induce his neighbours to come to some arrangement with him, or that he will endeavour to make peace with them by offering to throw us over, and to join with them against us." "Well, then, I should say, Doctor, that the best thing would be to hang the ruffian up at once." "Well, yes, that might be a good plan, Parkhurst," the doctor said with a smile, "and might save us a good deal of trouble. But, you see, we have come up here at his invitation. We have just been eating his food and drinking his liquor, and it would scarcely place us in a favourable position in the eyes of the natives in general were we to commence our alliance with him by hanging him." Harry laughed. "No, I suppose not, Doctor. Still, what are we to do?" "Well, we must wait, lad. We are here to ascertain the precise situation, and it will be some time before that will be cleared up. Certainly for the present there will be nothing for us to do but to keep quiet and see how matters turn out, and to get through the time as best we may. We shall have the fine opportunities for shooting and botanizing, for whatever the chief's designs may be, it is certain that at present he will do all in his power to please us. The captain today, at my suggestion, said that in order to keep the men in good health it would be desirable that they should have every opportunity of going ashore, and that the officers should make expeditions in search of game into the interior. The chief promised at once to afford us every facility, and to provide us with guides and beaters. The next day permission was granted to several of the officers and to 20 sailors and a dozen marines to go on shore. Before starting, the whole ship's company were drawn up, and the captain addressed them upon the absolute necessity for good behaviour. The captain said, "The Malays are a fierce race, very proud and independent, and quick to resent the smallest insult. Each man carries a kris, and is ready to use it on the slightest provocation. Every man who goes ashore must remember that not only his own life, but those of many others, and the success of the mission on which we have come hither, may be forfeited by any careless act of aggression. Many of you have served on the coast of Africa, but you must remember that the Malays are not to be treated in the same free and easy manner that may go down with negroes. You must comport yourself with the same decency of behavior that you would were you in the port of a friendly European power. Any breach of these orders will be most severely punished, and I appeal to every officer and man to use his utmost efforts to keep on good terms with these people, and to behave as if the honour and credit of the ship depended upon him personally. Any man who comes on board in the slightest degree the worse for liquor will not be allowed to land again, even if we are stationed here for 6 months, and if there is any misbehaviour on shore all leave will be stopped." 2 days later the captain, with the second lieutenant and doctor, again paid a visit to the rajah, and this time business matters were entered upon. The chief began by stating that he rejoiced at the thought of being under the protection of the great English queen. The captain replied that her majesty was anxious to be on good terms with all the Malay chiefs, that those rajahs and sultans who had accepted her protection had greatly benefited by so doing, and by listening to the advice of the officers whom she sent to reside at their seat of government; but that, of course, before receiving his state under her protection, it was necessary that her representative, the governor of the Straits Settlements, should be thoroughly satisfied that the rajah intended to be guided by the advice so given. He said that it was thoroughly necessary this should be understood, for that the allegiance offered to the queen could not be lightly thrown off. If a chief once owned her as his sovereign, he could not change his mind afterwards, and should he disobey the advice and orders of the resident, he would be liable to be dethroned and his government bestowed upon one better fitted for it. He could not, for instance, be allowed to engage in hostilities against his neighbours without the consent of the resident, for it was clear that the English could not assist him in wars in which they considered that he was in the wrong. In these matters there must be benefits on both sides. The chief would obtain protection against warlike neighbours, would benefit by the presence and advice of a British officer, and by the trade that would spring up, while in return for these benefits he must acknowledge the queen as his sovereign, and must obey the orders of her officers just as her native born subjects would do. The chief looked very serious at this. "Cannot," he asked at last, "a chief obtain the protection of the British, and afterwards remain as an ally of theirs?" "Not so," the captain said. "He cannot come to us when he is in danger and ask us to send ships and men to aid him, and afterwards, when the danger is past, wish us good morning and give us nothing in return for the benefits he has received." "What orders would a resident give?" the rajah asked after a pause. "He would give such orders as would be necessary for the good of the state. Without interfering in matters of home government, he would not allow acts of tyranny and cruelty that would imperil the peace of the state, and perhaps bring about a rising. He would not suffer trade passing through the dominions to be hampered or injured by heavy and unjust exactions. Although, doubtless, he would allow legitimate tolls to be taken, he would not permit expeditions to be fitted out for attacks upon harmless neighbours. His interference would always be for the good of the state, and consequently for the good of its prince. The incomes of the various rulers who have placed themselves under British protection have always been largely augmented by the prosperity and well-doing of the state, the increase in its population, the extension of its trade and agriculture, all of which enabled the people to pay a larger amount of taxation. You see, Rajah, we force no one to place himself under our protection. We war with no one, unless, by attack upon ourselves or upon princes under our protection, he compels us to punish him, and, in extreme cases, to take possession of his dominions. I am explaining all this to you because I wish you thoroughly to understand what your position will be if the Queen takes you under her protection, which she certainly will not do, unless it is found that you are likely, on your part, to carry out faithfully the obligations you have assumed in return for that protection." When this had been translated to the rajah by the interpreter, the chief sat for some time silent. It was evident that he was ill pleased, and that he had reckoned upon obtaining the British aid without undertaking any responsibilities whatsoever. "And the officer who will come up," he said at last, "would he reside on shore?" Certainly he would. A portion of ground would be allotted for the Residency. On this a fort would be erected, which would be manned by a small force for his protection, and he might either reside in the fort or in a residence erected for him close to it, and under shelter of its guns. The fort would, of course, be used for the protection of the town against enemies, as well as for the protection of the officer against any rising on the part of your people, in which case you, as well as himself, would find a refuge in it." "Then I should no longer be a ruler," the rajah said angrily. "I should not be able to order those who offended me to be punished." "Not at all," the captain replied quietly. "Your powers as a ruler would not be interfered with in any way, as long as they were properly exercised. You would have the power of executing ill doers in accordance with the custom of your country, but the murder of a person who had committed no crime whatever is not to be permitted, and anything like wholesale cruelty and tyranny would be sternly repressed." For some time the rajah sat without speaking. Then he said, with an evident effort of self control, "I must think all this over. It is all new to me." "By all means do so," the captain replied. "The matter is an important one, and you will do well to consider it in all lights before you take a step that, once taken, cannot be undone." "I don't like the fellow's looks, Doctor," the captain said. "He intended to use us as a cat's paw against his neighbours." "I think he is a thoroughly bad lot, sir, and if he accepted the terms I should be very sorry to be appointed resident, for I should not feel that my life was worth a day's purchase." "Well, there is nothing to do but to wait until we get a definite answer from him, and my instructions are that, if I find that he is not a desirable man to have to deal with, I am to enter into negotiations with other rajahs, and to endeavour to do something to open the trade of the river, and to render it safe for merchants who come up to trade. If Hassan's account of this man's doings is correct, he is the main cause of the falling off in the trade, and, moreover, the author of the piracies of which we have had so many complaints. Indeed, it is possible that when the governor learns the true state of things, I may get an order to present an ultimatum to this fellow, and to sink his piratical craft. At any rate, we may make up our minds to be here for some time." On the following day a message was received from the rajah, saying that if any of the officers wished to go on excursions for sport, guides would be placed at their disposal, and that all who wished to do so could at any time travel through the country without the slightest fear of molestation. For some time affairs remained in the same condition. The doctor went daily on shore with butterfly and beetle nets, tin boxes, and other paraphernalia. He was generally accompanied by a couple of bluejackets, and always took a native guide to prevent the risk of being lost in the jungle, and also because the man was able to take him to places where villages had stood, and it was in these clearings that insect life, especially among the lepidoptera, was most abundant. The Malay he first engaged was a young fellow who proved so intelligent and willing that he was permanently retained for the service as long as the Serpent remained on the station. The officers obtained no sport with big game, for although at night the forest was full of sounds, showing the number of wild animals that abounded, these never were met with during the daytime, and it would have been hopeless endeavouring to penetrate the thick jungle in search of them. There was, however, an abundance of birds, for the most part of brilliant plumage, and the doctor was delighted with the spoils they brought in, while the messes were kept well supplied with jungle fowl and other edible birds. The natives, learning from the guide of the doctor's passion for insects, brought in large numbers for sale, and he was able to purchase a great many specimens altogether new to science. The two midshipmen made excursions with their guns whenever they could get leave. Davis and two other sailors always accompanied them, as the captain's orders were strict that no officer or man should go outside the limits of the campong unless accompanied by two armed seamen. Sometimes they took a native canoe and went up the river fishing, but as an abundance of fish could be caught by lines from the ship's side, they only did this as a change, and often in the cool of the evening they lay lazily in the canoe, while the fishermen were employed rowing them up one or the other of the numerous streams which flowed into the river. The doctor's prognostications as to the health of the crew were only partially verified, for the precautions taken, if they did not secure a perfect immunity against fever, at least greatly diminished the number of those who suffered from it. The abundance of fish, either caught from the ship or purchased from the natives, formed a wholesome diet, aided by the fruit, of which the natives brought off a very large quantity. It was very varied, and much of it delicious. The mangosteens were specially appreciated, and those who could overcome their repugnance to the disgusting odour of the durians found them delicious eating. Beside these were custard apples, bananas, and many other kinds of fruit. All were very cheap, and upon the doctor's suggestion a supply was purchased daily for the use of the ship's company, and the sailors, who had no other use for their money, laid out no small portion of their pay on these luxuries. The captain had taken every opportunity, when boats passed up the river, to send messages and presents to the chiefs of the tribes higher up, with assurances that he had not come up as an enemy, but that he desired to be on good terms with all, and would gladly see any of them who would come down to pay him a visit, and would guarantee their safe return without molestation on the part of Sehi. No answers had, however, been received to these overtures, and a proposal he made to the rajah to send some of the ship's boats up the river to endeavour to bring about an understanding between him and his neighbours was received with extreme disfavour. Chapter 5. So far nothing had been seen of the rajah's prahus. When questioned on the subject, he replied that they were all down on the coast trading with the natives, but it was so improbable that they should have been sent away while the rajah was in fear of an attack by his neighbours that no credence was given to the assertion. The ship's boats often went out for long rows on the river, ostensibly, as the captain told the rajah, who inquired suspiciously as to the meaning of these excursions, for the sake of giving the crews active exercise, but principally in order to take soundings of the river, and to investigate the size and positions of the creeks running into it. One day the gig and cutter had proceeded farther than usual. They had started at daybreak, and had turned off into what seemed a very small creek, that had hitherto been unexplored, as from the width of its mouth it was supposed to extend but a short distance into the forest. The master's mate was in command of one boat, the second lieutenant of the other. Harry Parkhurst accompanied the latter. After pushing through the screen of foliage that almost closed the entrance to the creek, the boats rowed on for some distance. For half a mile the width was but some 15 yards, and the trees met in an arch overhead. Then it widened considerably. "This is just the sort of place," the lieutenant said to Harry, "where the rajah's prahus may be hidden away. We had best go along as noiselessly as possible. If we were to come upon them suddenly they might fire upon us, and that would bring on a general row. If we should catch sight of them, it would be best to take the news to the captain, and let him act as he thinks fit." The lieutenant ordered the men to cease rowing until the gig came alongside. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "it seems to me that this is a likely place for the prahus to be hidden. We had better try and discover if this is the case without being ourselves seen. Therefore, have all the oars except 4 laid in, and let the men muffle those with their stockings, and be most careful to dip them into the water without making a splash. Let absolute silence be preserved in the boat. I will lead the way as before, and if I hold up my hand, stop rowing instantly." "Aye, aye, sir," the mate replied. The same precautions were taken by the cutter, and the boats proceeded noiselessly. Presently the stream narrowed again until it seemed that they were approaching its termination, and the boat stopped rowing. "I fancy we have come to the end of it, Mr. Morrison," the lieutenant said in a low voice. "I am afraid so too, sir. There is no room for the oars, and we shall either have to punt the boats or to drag them by the bushes." The lieutenant was about to give the order to turn when Harry said, "There is a current, sir. I have had my eye upon that route, and we have drifted backward a couple of feet since we lost way, so there must be a stretch of water above us." The lieutenant watched the root of the tree to which Harry had pointed for a minute in silence. Then he said, "You are right, my lad. There is a current, and, as you say, there must be a stretch of water above us. Lay in your oars, lads, stand up and pull her along by the boughs and bushes, but don't make the slightest sound." 20 yards farther the creek widened, and the oars were again got out. "Take your place in the bow, Mr. Parkhurst, and hold up your hand the instant you see anything unusual, and do you, men, be ready to hold her up the instant I give the order." They proceeded for a quarter of a mile, the gig following close behind. Suddenly, at a bend in the stream, a glare of light was seen ahead. Harry held up his hand, and passed the word down in a whisper that just ahead the creek widened into a broad sheet of water. The lieutenant stopped the gig by holding up his hand, passed the order for the men to lay in their oars noiselessly, and told the coxswain to keep in well under the bushes on the left hand side. Then he made his way forward and joined Harry, telling the men to pull the boat forward by means of the branches overhead, which were well within reach, but to avoid breaking even a twig. In a minute or two the bow of the boat arrived at the end of the screen of bushes, and a low exclamation broke from the lieutenant and Harry simultaneously. They were looking out on to an almost circular pool, some 200 yards in diameter. In the centre were moored 6 prahus. 2 of them lay broadside on to the creek, the other 4 were in a line behind these, and it seemed that their broadsides were directed to the opposite side of the pool, for the other 2 boats were in the way of their firing at the creek. They were long, low vessels, rowing some 20 oars on each side. Each carried a number of small brass guns, and they were evidently full of men, for numbers could be seen on deck, and boats were passing to and fro between them and a small village at the edge of the pool. Having taken in all the details of the scene, the lieutenant passed the word for the mate to leave his own boat and join him. When he did so, the lieutenant whispered to him, "I thought it as well that you should have a view of these fellows' position too, Morrison, as it would be of use to you if you have to take a boat in to attack them." 2 minutes later the boats were drawn back again to the open water in their rear, and rowed as noiselessly as before down the creek, no word being spoken until they were half a mile away from the pool. "That is a snug hiding place, Mr. Morrison," the lieutenant said. "It is indeed, sir. Who would have thought the scoundrels were so close to us, or that they lay up this narrow creek, which I have passed half a dozen times and never thought worth examining? I should not have dreamt that one of those craft could have passed through." "I doubt whether they did pass through. They hardly could have done so without breaking down a good many of those branches, and we must have seen signs of that. I think they must have got into that pool by some creek coming in on the opposite side. You see, 4 out of the 6 boats were anchored in line so as to bring their broadsides to bear on some point opposite to them, while the other 2 guarded them against any attack from this side. Naturally they thought it unlikely that any boat would come up here, so directed their main attention to the other opening. The next thing to find out will be where the other stream joins the river. Otherwise, as soon as we make our appearance they will escape that way, and there is not the least doubt that they could row away from our fastest boats. However, it is a great thing that we have discovered their whereabouts without their having the least notion that we have done so, and I am sure the captain will be very pleased when he hears that we have found them. It will give him the whip hand over that lying rascal Sehi." Captain Forrest smiled grimly when the lieutenant made his report of the discovery that he had made. "Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. That is a very valuable discovery. Just at present matters have not come to a point when we can turn it to account. The next thing will be to find out where the other passage comes out. It will be a serious business to attack them in the boats alone. These prahus carry a tremendous lot of men, and the Malays will fight desperately. I do not say that we might not succeed, but we should lose a lot of men in the attempt. It would be hot work even with the ship, attacked by 6 of these fellows at once. If it was in the night we might fail to see any of them before they were upon us, and we should have hard work to beat back 400 or 500 of them if they all came swarming on deck together. However, we can wait, and the first time the rajah shows any signs of treachery we can pounce upon his fleet. He will not dream that we have discovered their hiding place, and will therefore let them hide there without movement. However, we must try to find the other end of the entrance to the creek. Please impress upon Mr. Morrison and young Parkhurst that it is of the highest importance. No words shall be spoken about it, and it might be advisable also to give notice to the men who are in the boats to keep their mouths shut. I have no reason to believe that the interpreter is not faithful to our interests, but it is just as well not to trust anyone. Moreover, it may be that some of these Malays who come on board with fruit may have been for a time at Singapore or Penang, and picked up a little English, and a chance word might let them know that we have discovered the prahus." "I wonder why our friend Hassan has not turned up," Dick Balderson said to his chum one day, after they had been lying for a month opposite the town. "I expect something has occurred to keep him," Harry said. I'm quite convinced that he would have come if he could. He may be in trouble himself with some of his neighbours, or he may have tried to exert himself too soon and done himself damage. I'm quite convinced that he meant what he said. At any rate, till this business here comes to a head, we are not likely to be able to go up and pay a visit to him." "No, I am quite sure that the captain would not let us go now, and indeed I would not ask him, even if I were sure he would, for we may get to blows with the rajah any day. He cannot put off giving a final answer much longer. I wonder the captain stood his shilly-shallying as long as he has." It was but 2 evenings after this that, as the 2 midshipmen were leaning against the bulwarks watching the reflection of the stars in the sluggish stream, a native sampan stole silently out from the shadow of the shore and dropped down alongside the Serpent. So noiseless was the movement that the 2 men on the lookout in the bow did not notice it, and the midshipmen thought it was a shadow of some dark object floating down stream, when it came alongside and a man stood up. "Hello," Harry said, "you must not come alongside like this. What do you want?" "Dick, Harry, Doctor, come from Hassan." "Oh, that's it. All right, come on board," and leaning over he stretched out his hand to the native, who seized it and in a moment stood by his side on the deck, holding the head rope of his sampan in his mouth. "Davis," Harry said to the sailor who was standing 2 paces away, "just go down to the wardroom and tell the doctor, with my compliments, that I shall be obliged if he will come on deck at once. Say that it is something particular." A minute later the doctor appeared. "I was just in the middle of a rubber, Dick, and if you have not an uncommonly good reason for calling me up, I'll make you smart for it the first time you get under my hands. Whom have we got here?" "He's a messenger from Hassan. He mentioned our names and yours." "Oh, I am glad of that," the doctor said, rubbing his hands together. "They have been chaffing me in the wardroom about it, and prophesying that I should never hear of him again. Well, what does he say?" "He has not said anything except our names, Doctor, and that he comes from Hassan. I don't suppose he knows any more English, and I thought we had better consult you, whether it would be best to send for Sohay. He may have brought some message of importance." "Right, lad. I think the most prudent thing will be to tell the captain first. It may only be a message to say why he has not come, or it may be a matter of some importance. I'll go to the captain at once." 2 or 3 minutes later the doctor returned. "You are to bring him to the captain's cabin. Here, Davis, pass the word forward that the captain wants to see Soh Hay in his cabin." Harry touched the native, who had been standing quietly by his side, and signed him to accompany them, and with Dr. Horsley and Dick went directly to the cabin. "So your friend has sent a message at last, lad?" Captain Forrest said. "I am glad of that, for I own that I had doubts whether we should hear any more of him." "You come from the chief, Hassan?" the captain, who had been working at the Malay tongue with the interpreter since he had arrived at the mouth of the river, asked in that tongue. The man's face brightened. "Yes, my lord," he said. "Is he well?" "The chief is quite well." "I wish I knew enough to question him without Soh Hay's interference, but I shall only make a mess of it, and perhaps get a wrong idea altogether of his message. Now, Soh Hay," he broke off as the interpreter entered, "you will ask this man the questions exactly as I put them, and tell me his answer word for word. It may be of importance. Now, ask him first what message he brings from his chief to the officers." The question was put, and the native, speaking slowly and quietly, and evidently repeating a lesson that he had learned by heart, said: "The chief sends his greeting to his 3 friends, Harry, Dick, and Doctor, also to Captain. He is well in body, he is cured, and can throw a spear and lead his men to battle. He has sent 4 messengers, one after another, but none has returned with an answer. They have no doubt been krised. Now he sends me." "Tell him that no messenger has arrived until now," the captain said, when this was interpreted to him. The man nodded. "All krised. I travel at night, hide in trees all day, float down at night in shadow of bushes, and have got through safe. Chief Hassan says not been able to come down. Other chiefs very angry because English warship come. Send message to Hassan to join them. When he say no, they threaten to kill him and destroy tribe when warship go away. 2 of Rajah Sehi's prahus go up and down river. Stop all boats. Sehi sent message to all chiefs, say that English war boat here. English come take his country, and after they done that, take the countries of the others. Make themselves kings of the river. He ask them to join him in killing English, every man. Then he would have no more quarrel with them, no trouble trade any more. Be good friends with all neighbours. Some chiefs say one thing, some another. Some more afraid of Rajah than of English. Some think better have English here than Rajah. Hassan says must take great care. Sehi very treacherous. Attack when they do not expect it. He thinks his prahus can easily take English ship, but Hassan says Sehi wants the other chiefs to aid, so that if the English send up more ships, then can all join him in fighting them. Hassan says he will do what he can. He has 8 war canoes, but no good against prahus. They run at canoes and cut them in half, but will come to help if English attack. He does not know where prahus are. Begs captain to attack these first. It is they that make Sehi master of the river. If they destroyed other chiefs, not afraid of Sehi, and he might get some of them to join against him. Hassan said, tell Harry and Dick and Doctor he does not forget their kindness, and will do what he can to watch over them. Such is Hassan's message. Ask him when he is going back to his chief, the captain said. He go now, the interpreter said after asking the question. He get as far as he can before morning. He sure many eyes watch ship night and day to see that no message comes or any word of what Rajah is doing. He float downstream in sampan some distance, then paddle to opposite bank, then keep in shadow of bushes up the river, and hide away till night comes again. Very well. Then tell him that he is to thank his master for sending us warning, that we had already found out that what he told us before he went away was true, and that Sehi is a very bad man. Say that we are not afraid of prahus, and will make short work of them when we get a chance. Tell him we will take great care, and not let ourselves be surprised, and that when we have finished with this fellow here, the ship will come as far up the river as she can go, and show the chiefs that the English have no evil intentions against them, and will send his 3 friends with a strong boat party to pay him a visit. By the way, ask the man if he knows this part of the country. Yes, captain. He says that he has been since his boyhood a boatman, and has worked for some years with a trader who used to go up the creeks and trade with the villagers. Ask him if he knows a creek that turns off from the river 4 or 5 miles above this. It is a very small one, but it leads into a pool on which is a large village. The man nodded at once when the question was put, then spoke for a minute or two. He says, captain, that he knows the pool and village, but he has never been up the small creek that you speak of, did not know that a boat could get through. He has been there by a large creek that runs into the other branch of the river, the one that turns off 12 miles below this. From that river it is an hour's paddle in a sampan to the pool. How should we know the entrance? The captain asked. Entrance difficult to find, the native replied. Strip of land runs out from both sides covered with trees. One goes a little beyond the other, so that anyone who did not know it would pass the entrance without noticing it. It is just wide enough for a large craft to go in and out. There is a village stands 100 yards below the entrance. It would be known by a big tree that grows before a large house close to the bank. The water is deep on that side. You have only, after passing the village, to keep close inshore, and you will then see the entrance to the creek. It is called Alligator Creek, because more than any place it swarms with these creatures. Thank you, the captain said. Will you tell the chief that I say you have rendered me a valuable service? He opened a case in which he kept presents intended for the chiefs, and took out a brace of handsome pistols, a powder flask, and a bullet mold. Take these, he said, in token of the service you have rendered. When I see your chief, you shall be well recompensed for the risk that you have run in bearing me his message. The Malay looked longingly at the pistols, and then said, I came by order of my chief, and not for reward. Quite so, I understand that, and am not offering you a reward for that service, but for the information that you have given me, which may be of value if I have trouble with the Rajah here. The man bowed and took the pistols offered. "I will use them against your enemies," he said warmly, "but all of us know the creek, for it is that which renders it so difficult for us to fight against Sehi. He is master of the water, and we cannot attack him without first crossing that creek. We should have to carry canoes with us to do it, for the creek is too full of alligators for anyone to swim across, and our small canoes would have no chance of passing the creek when his war boats were there." The captain nodded when this was translated to him. Sehi's place, in fact, stands upon an island formed by the two branches of the river and this creek. As soon as he became master of the river he could hardly be assailed, while at any time he could sally out and fall upon his enemies. Ask the man if he will take any refreshment before he goes." The man declined. He had, he said, sufficient fruit and dried fish for his journey back. A few minutes later he took his place in the little canoe and drifted away into the darkness, and was soon lost to sight. Chapter 6. "Things are coming to a crisis, Harry," Dick Balderson said in a tone of delight, as they left the captain's cabin. "We now know what we all along suspected. The rajah is a rascal, and we have not only found out where his prahus are hidden, but have them corked up in a bottle." "Nothing could be better, Dick, and I expect we shall have some pretty hot work. Of course the Serpent cannot get up that creek, though she can place herself at the entrance and prevent their getting away. But there still remains the work of capturing or driving them down the creek, and that is likely to be a very tough job." The next morning the second lieutenant, the mate, and Harry Parkhurst were sent for to the captain's cabin. The first lieutenant was also there. They were each asked their opinion as to whether the prahus could force their way through the creek by which they had ascended. "It is a most important point," the captain said, "and indeed everything might depend upon it." "I am sure, sir," Mr. Hopkins said, "that they could not go straight down it. They might cut their way through, but it would be a work of considerable time, for with their masts they would have to clear away the branches to a considerable height. Down near the water the branches by which we pushed ourselves along were those of the undergrowth, with many rattans and other creepers varying from the thickness of one's thumb to that of one's wrist, and these would take a great deal of chopping before one of their war boats could be pushed through. But higher up they would probably have much thicker branches to contend with. It may be that they can lower their masts, but even if they could do so, I should think that it would take them over an hour's work, even with the number of hands they carry, to get a passage through that bit of thick undergrowth, 50 or 60 yards up the mouth of the creek. There are 2 or 3 other places where some chopping would have to be done, but that would be comparatively easy work." The mate and Harry both agreed with the lieutenant. "Practically, then," the captain said, "the Malays have but one mode of escape, while we have 2 of attack. At any rate, if we send up a boat beforehand, and fasten 2 or 3 iron chains from side to side among the branches, that passage would be securely sealed. Thank you, gentlemen, that's all I have to ask at present. It's a very difficult nut we have to crack, Mr. Ferguson," he went on, when he and the first lieutenant were alone. "To attack 6 strongly armed prahus with the boats of this ship would be a serious enterprise indeed, and its success would be very doubtful, while the loss would certainly be very heavy, especially as, if any of the boats were sunk, the crews would have but little chance in a place swarming with alligators. I don't think I should be justified in risking such an enterprise." "There is no doubt, sir, the loss would be very heavy indeed. By all accounts these Malays fight like demons on the decks of their own boats, and, for aught we know, they may after nightfall trice up rattans to prevent boarders getting on board. I have heard that it is their custom when they expect an attack, and that these are far more formidable obstacles than our boarding nets. Of course I should be quite ready to lead an attack should you decide upon making one, but I cannot conceal from myself that it would be a well nigh desperate undertaking." "I am glad that you are of that opinion," the captain said. "There seems to me but one course, and that a difficult one, namely, to carry a couple of heavy guns through the forest to the edge of the pool. It would be a serious undertaking, and we should have to send a strong force to defend them, but if we could succeed in planting them in position, we should soon drive the Malays out of the pool." "That would be a capital plan, Captain, if it could be managed. I suppose before we attempt it you will take possession of this place and capture the rajah." "That, of course, I don't suppose we shall capture him." I have no doubt that we are closely watched night and day, and that the instant the boats are lowered and the men get on board the rajah would prepare for flight, though he might possibly make some resistance. However, that would be but trifling. Our guns would cover the landing and knock the place about his ears, but to penetrate the jungle would be vastly more difficult an affair. If, as is probable, he has succeeded in inducing some of his neighbours to join him, they may have already sent strong contingents, and the forest may be full of them. In that case it would be quite beyond our power to rout them out, and I certainly should not be justified in attempting it. The destruction of his town and the burning of his palace would be a serious blow to him, but the destruction of his piratical fleet would be a very much heavier one. If we can achieve that, we shall have done good service. The first thing to do is to find out whether there is a path either from this river or the other branch to the pool. If so, at dark, after destroying the town, we will recall all men on shore, buoy the anchor, drop it noiselessly, and drift down the river till we are far enough away to use the engines, then steam down to the junction of the two streams, and up again to the entrance to the creek on that side. Then we will at once land a very strong party, land also two 24-pounders, and drag them to the pool. We might hope to do so without any opposition, for the Malays would no doubt be gathered at the edge of the forest near the town to repel any attack we might make from there, and before morning we might have the guns in position. I should take 100 empty sacks. These you would fill with earth when you get near the pool, and form a battery with them behind the screen of bushes. Then, when you are ready, you will cut down the bushes and open fire." "I don't see why that should not succeed, sir. Of course, the most difficult part of the operation is dragging the guns. These native paths are only broad enough for men in single file." "Yes, that is the difficulty. We could not employ axes to cut down the trees, and to saw them down would be an interminable work. I think, Mr. Ferguson, we should have to carry them." "I doubt if we could carry a 24-pounder, sir, but we might carry an 18. They have bamboos of almost any length here, and if we were to lash an 18-pounder between two of them, I should say that 10 men each side ought to be able to carry them, while as many more might take the gun carriage." "We will get some bamboos today, Mr. Ferguson, and try the experiment of how many men will be required to carry a gun. But now I think of it, I fancy that it will be still easier to lay the guns down on a sledge-shaped piece of timber. These paths are smooth enough where the natives tread, and the men could haul the guns along with ropes." "That would be better and easier, sir. The difficulty with the carriages would be greatest, but they might be taken to pieces as far as possible and slung on bamboos." "I think that we shall be able to manage all that," the captain said cheerfully. "The first thing is to find the path. There is almost sure to be one from the village the Malay spoke of, as close to the mouth of the creek and the pool, and if we send the boats up as soon as we arrive at the creek, to row with muffled oars until they get near the pool, and then land and find the path, it would diminish very much the distance they would have to go and the work to be done." "It would be a great thing to find that out beforehand, sir. If you like, I will drop down the river this afternoon in the gig. That will attract no attention, for it will be thought that we are merely going fishing or shooting. As soon as it is dark we will muffle the oars and row up the other branch, find the mouth of the creek and row up it, first find out how far it is to the pool, then drop down a quarter of a mile and land, strike into the jungle and look for the path. I should, of course, choose a point where the creek bends that way, for as the path no doubt goes straight from the village to the pool, it would be nearer the creek at a bend than it would be at any other point. If it is a sharp bend, it might go quite close to it." "That would be a very good plan, Mr. Ferguson, and as you have proposed it, you shall take command of the boat. Otherwise I should have to send either the third lieutenant or Morrison. I need not say that it will be necessary to use the greatest caution, and to avoid all risks as much as possible, though I fancy that my gig would run away from any of the ordinary native craft. But of course the great point is to avoid being noticed, for were one of our boats seen up the other river near the creek, the alarm would be given, and the prahus might at once shift their position and make up the river, where we should have little chance of finding them again." "I quite understand that, sir, and will be as careful as possible. I will take one of the midshipmen with me, either Mr. Parkhurst or Mr. Balderson. If the worst came to the worst, and one of the men were hit, he could man his oar, or, if I were myself badly wounded, could take the command. I think it's Baldison's turn for boat duty." "Either of them will do," the captain said. "They are both strong, active lads, and as steady as you can expect lads to be." Accordingly, at 4 in the afternoon, the captain's gig was lowered. As the rule was that all men on boat duty should go armed, no surprise had been excited when the order was given for the men to take their muskets and cutlasses, though when an extra supply of ammunition and a brace of pistols were served out to each, they thought that something unusual was in the wind, and there was a grin on the men's faces when a hamper of provisions was placed in the bow of the boat. Dick was in a state of high but suppressed delight when informed by the first lieutenant that he was to accompany him on a boat expedition, and that he had better take his cloak with him, as they might be out all night. "You can take your pistols with you, Mr. Balderson. It's not likely that they will be wanted, but it's as well to carry them." Dick borrowed a cutlass from the armourer and ground it down to a razor edge, for his dirk was an altogether useless weapon if it came to fighting. He was the more convinced that something more than usual was intended when he saw the assistant surgeon place a parcel in the stern sheets. "Bandages, I expect," he said. "Where do you think we can be going, Harry?" "Well, perhaps we are going up the creek again, Dick. Who's going in command?" "I have not heard. Morrison says he has not been told off, so I suppose it's Hopkins. In fact, if you are going up the creek, it's sure to be him, as one of us who went up there before would certainly be in command. It's rum that taking the captain's gig. He's very particular about it, and it's very seldom indeed that even the first luff uses it. I suppose they think it possible that you may be chased, and there is no doubt she is far away the fastest boat on board. She's not a dockyard boat, but, as you know, is one the captain had specially built for himself, and for racing, if we were at any station where there were other warships." When 4 o'clock came, and the first lieutenant, with his cloak over his arm, came out and took his place in the boat, there was a general look of surprise among the sailors leaning on the rail to see her put off, for it was a very unusual thing for the first officer to take the command when only a single boat's crew was going out on any expedition. "Row easy, men," Mr. Ferguson said, as he sat down on one side of the coxswain, while Dick took his place on the other. "Drop quietly down the river. There's my fishing rod by your side, Mr. Balderson. You may as well begin to put it together at once, so that the natives on shore may see that we are going on a fishing expedition." They rowed some 10 miles down at a leisurely pace, and then the boat's grapnel was dropped at a bend of the stream, where the water was unusually deep, and several baskets of fish had been taken at various times. A spare rod was brought out from under the seat, and Mr. Ferguson and Dick began to fish, one on each side of the boat, while the men lay on their oars, and a look of satisfaction came over their faces as the lieutenant told them that they could smoke. Hitherto Dick had been in ignorance as to the object of the expedition. He had been much surprised when the order had been given for the boat to row down the river, and it was therefore evident that it was not the intention of the first officer to again explore the creek. Several fish were caught, but as soon as it became dark the lieutenant said, "You can throw them overboard again, Mr. Balderson. We don't want any extra weight in the boat, and those fish must weigh 30 pounds at least. Now, what do you suppose we are going to do?" "I have no idea, sir. I thought that we might be going up the creek that Lieutenant Hopkins explored the other day, to have another look at the prahus, but as we came down the river instead of going up, of course it's not that." "No, we are going to explore the creek, but from the other end." "Oh, that will be first rate, sir, but I am afraid that we shan't find water enough for the Serpent." "No, I fear that there is little chance of that. Still, we may obtain information that will be valuable." The night was a dark one, and an hour after sunset the grapnel was got up. The boat continued its way down the river, the oars being now muffled, and the strictest silence ordered. "Keep your eyes open, Mr. Balderson," the lieutenant said. "I think that it must be another 3 miles to the point where the river forks. The other branch comes in on the right, so we will keep on the left bank. I don't think there's much fear of our missing the junction of the stream, but if we do, we will row on to a mile below the point where we think it is, then cross and keep up on the other side. In that way we cannot miss it." For the next half hour no word was spoken in the boat. Dick kept his eyes fixed on the opposite bank.
Suddenly he touched the lieutenant. "There, sir, that must be it. The line of the trees has suddenly stopped, and I think I can make out a lower line behind it." "Yes, no doubt that is the junction. We will go 200 yards farther down before we cross. It is unlikely in the extreme that anyone is watching us. Still, I don't want to run the slightest risk." In another 5 minutes they crossed the river, whose increased width showed them that they had assuredly passed the junction of the stream. Then they turned and followed the right hand bank. "Stretch out a bit now, lads. You have 15 miles straight rowing before you, and the sooner you get to the other end the better. We may have a long night's work before us, and I want to be able to get to the place where we fished before morning." The men bent to their oars, and the boat sped swiftly along. The current was very slight, and after 2 hours' rowing the lieutenant judged that they must be but a short distance from the village Hassan's messenger spoke of. Accordingly he told the coxswain to steer across to the other bank, and warned the men that the slightest splash of their oars might attract attention, and that they were to row easier for the present. In a quarter of an hour the wall of forest ceased, and 100 yards farther they saw houses. 2 or 3 dim lights were visible, and the sound of voices could be heard. The boat's head was now turned out somewhat farther into the stream, so as to be out of sight of anyone who might by chance come down late to draw water. After rowing 100 yards they could dimly make out the outline of a white house. There was a break just in the centre, and the outline of a tree could be seen above the roof. Dick leant forward and again touched the lieutenant. "That must be the house, sir," he whispered. Mr. Ferguson nodded without speaking, and after the boat had gone another 100 yards the line of forest could again be seen, and the boat was rowed into the bank, and 2 minutes later shot through a narrow channel and entered a creek some 40 yards wide. "Now you can give way again, lads." An hour's paddling in a sampan would mean about 3 miles, and after 20 minutes' sharp rowing the men were ordered to row easy again, and the lieutenant and Dick kept an anxious lookout ahead. The creek was here little more than 50 yards across, and, accustomed as their eyes were to darkness, they presently saw that it widened out suddenly. The word was passed down for the men to paddle easily, and in 2 minutes the pool opened before them. They could not make out the prahus lying as they did against the shadow of the trees on the farther side, but they could see a number of lights, apparently from swinging lanterns, and hear a loud murmur of voices. "Easy all," the lieutenant ordered now. "Back her very quietly. Now pull, bow." Noiselessly the boat was brought round, and its head directed to the right hand bank. They had passed a sharp bend nearly half a mile back, and the lieutenant said, "Look out for a landing place at the deepest point of the curve, Harris." "Aye, aye, sir," the coxswain said, standing up. A minute later he brought the boat alongside at a point which was free from bushes, and where the bank was but 2 feet above the water's edge.